Aspen has a suitcase that has all of the logs going all the way back to the first meeting in 1946. And they do include the signature, address, and phone number of Les Paul in February of 1946. So we're going to do a series. Aspen has asked me to help him put this together. A series of short presentations about some of the original members of the Sapphire group and short bios of them based on whose signatures we've found in these logs. And what you're looking at here, this is going to be the August 47 log, and one of the names in there is Bill Stancil, about whom Shelley Herman here wrote an article for DB Magazine in 1991. And Shelley's going to read that article for you now.
Okay? I'm going to try and excerpt it a bunch. But you know, I just heard something before. He mentioned about a watch that is like a metronome to keep the band together. And having played in marching bands when I was in high school and college, I thought, man, that has got to be the greatest thing in the world for a marching band that's spread all over the field, and that could keep them all together. What a great thing that would be. Anyway, you have to forgive me for reading this, but my 83-year-old mind is like Teflon, nothing sticks. You see a nice thick bundle of papers here that look like I'm going to speak forever, but it's really because I have to use a very large typeface. And like I said before, I did not know I was going to make this presentation till yesterday, so I have to read it. It's excerpted from an article I wrote for DB Magazine in 1991 based on an interview the year before, or 6 months before. So some of the concepts will be dated, and some of the names will be unfamiliar to our younger members. Be reassured that most of the people mentioned were stars of the audio world at that time. The information in this article is all from Bill Stancil's interview, and like if you listen to the Les Paul interview or any of those other interviews, we didn't have Wikipedia at the time, so I don't guarantee any of the accuracy.
Even with Wikipedia.
Bill Stancil was a pioneer in sound. And among other things along the way, a theater usher, a negative developer, a portrait artist, an animator, a personal secretary, a dancer, a film extra, field engineer, inventor, researcher, salesman, and once strictly for fun, an apprentice con man. A con man? Well, yes. Bill and his friend Ben Lyon liked flying and would use any method they could to leave the ground. One evening, Ben told a dinner guest that Bill was the son of a wealthy Detroit auto magnate and that was interested in buying the guest's tapered wing Waco airplane. The guest took them down to Culver City Airport and let them make a test flight. 3 weeks and 3 test flights later, the plane's owner figured out that Bill couldn't even afford the gas, much less the airplane. So he grounded them. Howard Hughes probably never fell for that thing again. Whoa. Bill told me that story during an interview in December of 1990. I had approached him at a AES meeting that was on the Disney lot. And I had the idea of writing about his career. I had remembered him from 25 years before as a man who didn't suffer fools lightly, and was delighted to find him considerably mellowed, knowledgeable, and on many subjects, and had a great sense of humor and an excellent recall, which is more than I have. We shared a delightful day at his office and his home in Newport Beach. I recorded the whole day on my DATs, but in the short time I've been doing this, like yesterday and today, I have not yet found them. Bill Stancil summed up his career in one sentence: I was at the right place at the right time. Born in 1909 and Royal Oak, Michigan. Bill's interest in electronics was sparked the year he was 12 when radio station WWJ went on the air. He used oatmeal boxes and wound coils that made a variometer. Now, I don't know what a variometer is, but he made them. And he sold them for 10 bucks a piece. Eventually, he helped build a radio station. He worked as a usher in a motion picture theater, and when sound came along, he just had to come to Hollywood. That's all there was to it. He got a ham license in May of 1925 and was active in what we now call electronics. He got out of high school in 27 and went to Michigan State College for a year, studying art and taking general courses for electrical engineering. He said in those days, they didn't know what a milliamp was. He says they had volts or amperes, nothing smaller. In the Detroit area, the most prominent citizen was Henry Ford. And as Mr. Stancil Sr. worked for the IRS, Bill would hear of events involving Mr. Ford and met him on many occasions, including once with Charles Lindbergh. In 1929, Bill worked for Eddie Stinson, the aviator and aircraft builder. And as Bill set up Stinson's exhibit for the air show, he looked up and there was Henry Ford all along. Well, Bill had earlier visited some of the other booths, and he met Dr. Ernst Alexanderson, I'm sorry. And Ernst Alexanderson is the man that invented he invented the alternator. And he was able to introduce Ford to Alexanderson, and Alexanderson invented a device that was later used in the famed Ford tri-motor airplane. Once again, he was in the right place at the right time. Bill hitchhiked from Michigan to Hollywood.
You need some water, Shell?
Well, I have some right here. What I didn't spill, it didn't work. Bill hitchhiked from Michigan to Hollywood. With the amount of money he had, he lasted 4 or 5 months, then back to Royal Oak. Hollywood was a closed door. Back and forth he went until finally he got a job at MGM Studios. He wound 200 feet of film on racks in the dark, then dipped them in the developing tanks. This is before processing machines. He advanced up to assistant negative timer on the night shift. In the daytime, he was on the lot anyway, so he haunted the sound department. He became friendly with Olin Dupy, who was an early star in the sound business in film sound. And Olin got him a job into the sound department for $22.50 a week. After about a year and a half, the studio manager laid off everyone making less than $50 a week. Now, Bill had done some work for a cameraman named Gordon Avall, who was with Jam Handy Picture Company in Detroit. Gordon frantically called Bill and said, please, can you come back? Bill said, I just got canned, I'll be there. Jam Handy was married to the daughter of Louis Chevrolet, so his company got all of the audio-visual accounts for General Motors. Who says there isn't nepotism? Bill told Jam Handy, actually Ben Lyon came through Detroit on a personal appearance tour, and Ben Lyon was a movie star, and he asked Bill to go on the road with him. Bill told Jam Handy, I've got to go back to California, I can't stand these winters here. We just saw some of that on TV. When he said he was going back to California, all the people in the animation department of Jam Handy got together and gave him a letter to Walt Disney, who they had known when Walt Disney was in Kansas City. And he met Walt, and Walt said, I understand you like art. I'll make you an animator. Bill said, I don't think so, but I'll try it. He was there for 6 weeks trying to be an animator. That didn't work. But during his early years in Hollywood, he lived with B.B. Daniels and Ben Lyon, major movie stars from the 20s and 30s, and Lee DeForest was B.B. Daniels' cousin.
Oh dear.
Oh, my.
Oh my.
And a frequent house guest at the Lyon Daniels home. Over dinner, DeForest would tell him of his various patents. Again, he was in the right place at the right time. During the heyday of the MGM musicals, the big name in film sound was Douglas Shearer.
Right.
And everybody knows that name because we all check who the sound guy is when we see the picture credit. Well, Doug Shearer had a sister. Her name was Norma Shearer.
Yeah.
And she was married to Irving Thalberg, and Irving Thalberg was the brains of MGM. But when Bill was working at MGM sound department, Shearer was just another employee. In his spare time, Bill was a portrait artist. And between takes, he drew a portrait of Marion Talley. Yeah, that's the one. Marion Talley, an opera star, appearing in a picture in which Bill was working. The portrait was picked up by the studio publicity department. It hit the wire services, and this photo of Bill drawing Miss Talley appeared in the papers all over the country. The right place at the right time. Bill also once worked as an extra for $5 a day. He, like many others, including my mother, who was an extra in all the musicals, would see themselves billed as "and a cast of thousands." And here's how that happened. In the early 1930s, Bill met author Don Marquis, famous for the Archibald and Mehitabel stories. Marquis was writing a play and a book, and Bill became his assistant. They went to lunch one day with the producer Kenneth McGowan, and Bill did a portrait of McGowan. As payment, Bill was given a contract as a dancer in the RKO picture Becky Sharp, the very first Technicolor feature. Bill said, it didn't matter that I didn't dance. I wore a costume. I moved around a little bit. We just got started on the picture and the director died. Then they brought in Ruben Mamoulian as the new director. But we were laid off at half pay for 6 months. Dollars from heaven. When Bill saw the picture, he found that all his dance scenes ended up on the cutting room floor. Bill's dancing partner once said, you see that fly man up there? That's my father. And the man over there? That's his best friend, Argyle Nelson, the assistant director. Nelson got Bill a job at the sound department at RKO. And one day a call came from MGM studio to RKO asking for an extra sound man for Gone with the Wind. He went to MGM to sign in. As he entered, the receptionist said, the door's over there. When you go out, close it, please. She practically threw him out of the office. 6 weeks later, they were engaged and they were married for 50 years. Bill worked for RKO, MGM, Goldwyn, and 20th, which is now 21st, Mascot, and nearly everybody else in the picture business. At some places like MGM, he was on contract. Usually he just freelanced from picture to picture. I asked Bill to name some of the well-known pictures that he worked on besides Gone with the Wind. Well, he says, I got stuck with William Wyler, who did Roman Holiday, but he'd take every scene 100 times. When he was at Goldwyn, he did Stella Dallas with Barbara Stanwyck, and he worked with Nat Levine, the man who discovered John Wayne of Mascot, which eventually became Republic Studios. In 1938, Bill gave a paper at an SMPE meeting. Now, you guys know it as SMPTE, but the TV wasn't around then. He was at the SMPTE meeting in the Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel. The subject was a phonograph pickup using a Darston Ball movement made by George Downs, chief engineer of Lansing Speakers. I think the Shure SM7 became that. At the SMPE meeting, he met Dr. S.J. Begun, I always have trouble with that name, Dr. S.J. Begun of Brush Development. He told Begun, look, I've got the speakers here and we'll set it up so we can demonstrate your wire sound mirror. The wire sound mirror stood about 3 feet high and the wire went 60 feet a minute. He didn't do Begun any favor by using good speakers because it just made the sound mirror sound even worse. And if anybody who's ever used a wire recorder will testify to that. The very first recording I ever made in my life was Kid Ory's band on a Webcore wire recorder, and that was in 1949. Although Hewlett-Packard gives much of the credit to Stancil, Bill felt that George Downs deserved much of the recognition for the event that sparked the founding of Hewlett-Packard. Disney Studios hired Johnny Hawkins to design the multiple speaker installations for Fantasia, and anybody who knows Fantasia knows it was 7-channel stereo. And Lansing, Disney Studios hired Johnny Hawkins, I said, to design the multiple speaker installations for Fantasia. Hawkins involved Lansing and George Downs at the same time. Now, Bill told me Dr. Effie Terman of Stanford, author of the Radio Handbook. I don't know whether that's right.
Turning.
One at a time.
Terman.
Terman? No, not Termaine. That Terman.
Terman.
Okay, I didn't know whether that was right or not. I thought he might have meant Howard Termaine.
No.
Fred Turner was the dean of the engineering school at Stanford at Packard, and Hewlett studied on.
Okay, well that's what I was getting to. I wasn't sure if that was the right name. And he had put some studios on a special project. One special project being an audio oscillator. George Downs went to Stanford area IRE, now IEEE meeting, where one of those students described his new oscillator. George saw it and heard it and met the student, William Hewlett. On his return, George went straight to Stancil, pulled out the schematic and said, we've got to get our hands on this thing. They started discussing where it could be applied, and George said, Johnny Hawkins at Disney, of course. He'll need it because he's going to have multiple tracks on Fantasia. When they talked to Johnny on the telephone, he said, if this thing works as well as George says it does, I know Walt will let me buy them. Bill, get out your order pad and come over here. Bill demonstrated an oscillator at Disney, and not even knowing whether Hewlett had them in production yet, he didn't, they sold for $78.50. He and David Packard and William Hewlett come down. They didn't even know whether to call it Packard Hewlett or Hewlett Packard yet. But they had him come down here. Bill rounded up all of his friends in broadcast and motion pictures, hired a hall, and showed him this new oscillator. He sold one of the first oscillators to Les Bowman, chief engineer of KNX. He sold one to KFI. And of course, Olin Dookie had Shearer buy one at MGM, Goldwyn Studios bought one, and all the places where Bill had ever worked, he was able to sell them one too. These sales persuaded Hewlett and Packard to go into the business. In the early 1940s, Bill was a field engineer for Motorola, and during World War II, while still on Motorola's payroll, he became involved with the Manhattan Project. How many here don't know what the Manhattan Project is? His job was to design an absolute altimeter adjusted so when the bomb dropped, it would explode in midair where it would do the most damage, which it did. After the war, David Selznick called Bill for advice on the film Duel in the Sun. A train had to be seen coming around a mountain and crossing a trestle where it would be blown up. Needless to say, there could only be one take, but they couldn't see the train coming. Bill used two-way radios for the first time, allowing the cinematographer to remotely direct the camera shot. And that was the beginning of doing that. When magnetic recording was new, there was a nasty patent pool fight. RCA was the policing agency, and Western Electric Bell Labs was one of the licensees. When Brush announced the new tape sound mirror, Bill flew back to Cleveland. He said, now the sound mirror was basically a hi-fi item. Bill went back to Cleveland and he said, I'm going to take that sound mirror and make a professional unit out of it, if you'll let me. I'll be clear of the patent situation because you are already licensed. He then repackaged the sound mirror into two suitcases, and I think there's a picture of it here somewhere. Yeah, that's it.
Shell, wasn't that Marvin Cameras?
Marvin
Brush?
Cameras was something there.
Brush, yeah.
Well, he said begun, but anyway,
It was the Brush, the original Brush.
Right.
he then repackaged the sound mirror in two suitcases and sold it to radio stations and recording studios. And one of his early customers was a man named Halleck Hoffman. Now, you all remember Hoffman radios and TVs. It was not that Hoffman. This Hoffman was the son of a man named Paul G. Hoffman, who happened to be president of Studebaker Automobile Company. Little money there. The Hoffmans, excited about this new technology, asked if they could invest in the fledgling enterprise. Still operating out of his garage, Bill jumped at the chance, and the company became Stancil Hoffman, which is how most of you know the company. Bill bought out the Hoffman interest a few years later, but retained the name until 1981. With the Stancil sound mirror in production, Bill started on the mini tape. This was the first battery-operated tape recorder. I think there's a picture of that. Yeah, this was the first battery-operated tape recorder. It used a Willard storage battery because there were no such things as gel cells in those days. The first mini tape went to radio station KTMS in Santa Barbara in 1948. Bill did some interviews with the mini tape recorder, and when he visited his friend Ben Lyon at the BBC in London in 1958, Ben was so impressed with the possibilities of the mini tape that he talked the BBC into setting up a show called Hollywood Go Round. The beat wouldn't permit third-party recording from telephone lines, so Stancil ingenuity was used. Using the mini tape, Bill would record the stars on location in Hollywood. Ben would ask the questions by transoceanic telephone, and the interviewee would respond on tape. Then Bill would send the tape to England, and they would edit in Ben's question. It was clumsy, but it complied with the BBC restrictions. The mini tape was dramatized in a book called The Great Man, which Universal Studios made into a motion picture. I never saw it. CBS bought Walter Cronkite a mini tape, and when he recorded Prince Rainier in Monaco, the prince was enthralled with it. Got to tighten up the teeth. Cronkite called Bill and said, I'll loan or sell him my mini tape, providing you can get me another one within a week. Even President Eisenhower owned a mini tape. His vice president, Nixon, surely must have known about the tape recorder.
And the gap.
The Japanese made a wind-up imitation, and the British copied it, even to the point of putting the same little window over the reels. About 1,500 mini tapes were made. About the same time, Bill was developing a multi-channel data recorder. There were no standard speeds or width at that time, so he standardized on 15 tracks on 7/10 inch wide tape. That's just as an aside. I, at one time, worked for Allison Research, and Paul Buff was in charge of it, and it was just right after 16 track had come out, and Paul had designed an 11-track tape recorder. And I asked him one time why he did 11 tracks. He says, well, there's no standard, and I thought 11 was a good number, so that's what I used. So that's how that sort of stuff goes. But to do that, he used 3 5-track interlaced recording heads and a single-channel playback head that moved up and down. Bill had a patent on the multi-channel interlace heads based on soldering the lamination pieces to a brass bar. When the laminations in the heads wore out, the old lamination assembly was removed and a new one was inserted, using the old one as a gauge. He took the recorders to any Waytalk for the hydrogen bomb test, where they were used to record all voice communications. His first professional audio recorder after the modified British unit was the TR-47 transcription recorder in 1947. You know, sometimes we're not real good at naming things in this business. It was a 1/4-inch professional recorder for music and speech. The original speed was 18 IPS, and Howard Chin, the chief engineer at CBS, said, if you can do this at 18 IPS, you can do the same thing at 15. Bill challenged that, but eventually changed over to 15 IPS. Having nothing on which to base his design except the old brush, he had to start from scratch and build heads, motors, and electronics. The first TR-47s used 4-pole synchronous motor with a beryllium capstan ground down to a little over 1/8 of an inch. You can imagine how that worked in diameter to get up 15 IPS. Bill started making his own 2-speed motors to get 7.5 and 15. By the time the Ampex Model 200 tape recorder came out in 1947, Stancil Hoffman was already in production making magnetic recorders. I asked Bill if he had dealt with Bing Crosby. As many of you know, Bing Crosby was the first distributor of Ampex tape recorders. He said, before tape, Bing Crosby used an RCA film truck to record his radio shows because they could edit the film. For Crosby, editing was an absolute necessity. You talk to anybody who knows about that. The show was recorded on photofoam film and edited, but the delay of the film processing made film recording unworkable. Crosby's people called Bill and said that Bing's contract with ABC was predicated on the fact that they needed 25 tape machines. Alex M. Ponyatov, now most of you know that he was the AMP in Ampex, and the EX was for excellence, that's where the name came from, came down to see Bill. He told Bill that Crosby put enough money up to do 24, 25 machines. Bill didn't have the facilities and wasn't in a position to do it. He was developing multi-channel data recorders and building the mini tape and developing the film recorders, so he stayed out of that.
Shelley?
Yeah?
Where was Jack Mullen in all of this? Jack Mullen.
Later on.
Close up and listen.
Okay, that's why I was asking, that's an answer, thank you.
Bill said at an Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences meeting, Jack Mullen came down from San Francisco to demonstrate his magnetophone recorder. Does that answer your question, Harvey?
I think so. Who was that again?
Of course, Dr. Hahn and Doc Frayne just poo-pooed it on the basis of no sprocket holes. You can't be, Rick. They were against it completely. Well, the rest is history. When Olin Dupy retired from MGM, Stancil hired him as a designer. Bill also hired C.C. Davis of ERPI and Westrex. Davis was the designer of the 4545 stereo cutter and the patented Davis film sound transport. Because of Dupy's experience on electrical interlock motors, the company was a prime source of interlock motors for films like Cinemiracle, and Cinerama and other road shows that use several projectors in interlock. And Bill had also patented a film timer. It used 3 interlock motors, one to drive the hour, one to drive the minutes, and one to drive the seconds. The AC that fed each motor was recorded on 3 tracks. So regardless of the film screen, it would always show the correct time. The same thing is done today electronically. It's called the SMPTE time code. Another project was a special recorder for the Caltech Seismic Research Department. The tape moved 1/10,000th of an inch per second. It was placed on an earthquake fault and recorded for 3 months. The tape was then brought back and run at 15 IPS. He said it sounded like gunfire, but the periodicity of the earthquakes could be charted. RCA and Western Electric prevented film studios from using magnetic recording because they held the patents. They were not interested in replacing the optical sound on film method of recording, which they also owned. Bill finally did get a Western Electric license, and after the data multitrack and the first audio recorders, Stancil Hoffman brought out a film recorder, the S4. Because Bill had worked in all of the studios and knew so many people, he was able to sell his equipment to everybody. Arch Obler, who developed 3D movies, used Stancil Hoffman equipment in his first 3D production, Buona Devil, which was an awful movie, as I remember. I can remember me and 2 friends sitting in the first row of the theater, and the native threw the spear like that, and I ducked that way, and I ducked that way, and Buddy in the middle goes, ah! You know, that was Buona Devil. And an aside on Buona Devil, my father was a dentist, and Colonel J.H. Patterson, who wrote the book that the movie was based on, was his patient. And somewhere in my library, I have an autographed copy of the book called The Man-Eaters of Tsavo. That was what Buona Devil. If you ever get to see it, it was so corny. I mean, it's just like, you know, like the first and everything. Lauren Ryder at Paramount was the only one that would take a gamble and buy any equipment before Bill had a license agreement. When Shearer at MGM also bought some, Bill was off and running in the motion picture business. Introduced in 1947, Stancil Hoffman film recorders were used around the world. Nearly everyone attending the famed USC School of Cinema learned on Stancil Hoffman film sound equipment. Although they have been out of production for over half a century, some of them are probably still out there working. In Bill's collection of memorabilia, I found the Stancil authored booklet explaining magnetic recording that had been my Bible when I was young and starting out in the business. I mentioned this to Bill, and his response surprised me. He says, "Sorry I did that to you. That's the most simplistic write-up in the world. It's elementary, it's grade school." That little pamphlet was the foundation for a lot of people that I know learning about magnetic recording back in the 1950s. Bill had a patent for a synchronizing system between 78 RPMs and a camera. And it was a toroidal coil with sweeping contacts, and the Navy liked the concept and gave Bill a contract to produce a similar type of DC interlock for a radar dish. They had been using a huge mechanical differential to do it, and Bill did it, you know, spun the radar dish around with a 24-volt battery. I asked him about Colonel Richard Ranger. Oh yes, I was good friends with Ranger. I got him in on the pool to fight the armor patents. We visited back and forth, and he spent a lot of time in my shop. He was famous for producing the chimes for NBC, and the first tape to film synchronization system. And if anybody ever saw any of the old Ranger recorders, they were the first ones that had a head in between the tracks for the synchronization. Stancil Hoffman products became transistorized in 1955. There were only one or two types of transistors at that time, and their signal to noise ratio was not very good. Bill said, I used to buy 2 or 3 dozen transistors at prices I could not afford just to get enough to build a 5-watt amplifier. If you sneezed, everything quit. Now look what you can do with a transistor. And he said this to me in 1990, 25 years ago. Now look what you can do with a transistor and a little heat sink. They talk about 500 watts as if we're nothing. And that was 25 years ago. Look what we got now. Early on, Stancil started using IF can enclosures for modular construction. They were small cans about 3 inches high and 1 1/8 inch square with octal sockets and circuit boards inside. The modules were oscillators and amplifiers, you know, play amplifiers, mic amplifiers. Think op-amp, if any of you know what op-amps are.
Los Mondes op-amp labs?
Huh?
Los Mondes op-amps?
Los Mondes, yeah, that was the same idea. They were used in everything. Why? Bill said often by the time in those days it was in a production unit, the transistor used was obsoleted in favor of a new model. This was progress, but it left the manufacturer holding the bag. By using the plug-in modules, Bill could obsolete one circuit and not throw out the whole piece of equipment. According to Bill later, he said, I saw the limited future of building equipment for the film business. It was too custom-oriented. The motion picture business takes a lot of time and you don't make much money in it in those days. In order to sell a piece of equipment, you had to teach them everything. For the first time, people were able to buy a recorder and then they were film producers. They had no money. Everything had to be on a cash basis. They would go bankrupt right and left, and you spent days and days with them. I finally gave up. The last film unit we built was the S6. As Stancil Hoffman Corporation moved away from the entertainment technology field, it moved more and more into the public service logging field. After a career spanning more than 60 years, most people I know would be content to look back and review their accomplishment. Bill Stancil was still looking ahead to new endeavors and discoveries. His pursuit of excellence and dedication to his work was legendary. He was at work at his desk when he was taken under protest to the hospital, where death overtook him on July 1st of 1991. Bill said he just happened to be in the right place at the right time. But what was more important, he knew what to do with those opportunities. Bill's daughter Sharon, along with her husband Mike, both of whom have been involved with the company for many years, continue Bill's work. Now there's more information about Bill in the article, and Aspen, I believe, has posted the article on the website. So if you want to know more about him, there's more there. There's also his eulogy is there. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time to write his eulogy. I'd just done this interview, and that's about all I've got for tonight. Thank you very much for listening.
All right.
All right.
Hollywood Sapphire.
Yes.
Thank you.
Great job.
Fantastic.
All right, gentle people. Anybody got anything else before we?